Hey there, this is Dennis Anyone with Dennis Hensley. It's a podcast about making things up and making things happen. I love talking to creative people about how they do their thing and how they keep it going. Today is part 2 of my interview with Carl Siciliano. He's the author of the book Making Room, 3 Decades of Fighting for Beds, Belonging, and a Safe Place for LGBTQ Youth. He's the founder of the Ali Forney Center in New York, and his book is so good. It's so rich. As I was reading it, I was circling things to ask him about, and there were so many things circled that it became a 2-parter. And in this part, we get to the Madonna and Lady Gaga story and so many other things. And his answers are thoughtful and deep, just like his book, and it was a pleasure to talk to him. But before I get to that, I want to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by me. I do it because I love it, and if you want to support it, help me keep it going, there are some things you can do. You can go to DennisAnyone.net and leave a tip in my virtual tip jar. And this week I got a fun email from a listener that made some comments about the books that I had written, Misadventures in the 213 and Screening Party. This was a while ago, but they're both available online if you look. And in Screening Party, the first chapter is about the movie Jaws, and apparently the woman that was in the first scene that got eaten by Jaws has passed away. And so this person was reminded of my book. His name's Matt Z, by the way, and he sent a really sweet email about my books and saying, I know this is a weird time for you going to this, landmark year and stuff, but your books still resonate. And he told me about how he got Screening Party purchased at a place called Seminary Co-op in Chicago, and I thought that sounds like a religious store. Were they selling my book at a religious store? And I went online, and it seems like more of a cool indie bookstore situation. And anyway, it was a very thoughtful email, made my day. And so there's that. The other thing you can do to support my podcast is consider becoming a subscriber to DNR Studios. I'm part of a group of shows under the Derek and Romaine banner, and for a monthly fee, you get my show early, and you get all these other great gay shows. So learn about that at DNR Studios. All right, enough of the plugs. Here now is part 2 of my interview with Carl Siciliano. All right, we're back with part 2 with my interview with Carl Siciliano. His book is Making Room, 3 Decades of Fighting for Beds, Belonging, and a Safe Place for LGBTQ Youth. He is the founder of the Ali Forney Center. We ended the last podcast near the end talking about one of the moments of grace that you write about in the book where you just feel something kind of profound. And there's another one that I wanted to mention and have you talk about a little bit. There's a talent show. And you guys would often have talent shows every year for the kids, and they would perform, and they were really fun. But there was one kid that he was going to sing, and he was struggling. And, it would be very easy to make fun of somebody like that. Kids are kids, but that's not what happened. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I found that so moving. That's sort of the centerpiece of one of the last chapters in the book.
Well, it's sort of the theme of the book in a way.
Yeah, celebration. I called that chapter. So yeah, this was not like one of the safe space talent shows that Ali was in. This was something that we did at the Ali Forney Center, and right. It was on a different scale. We would just do it in house, like for the staff and the young people and a few of the volunteers. And this young man, I remember he was wearing this big red sweatshirt with a hood, and I remember thinking he looks like a cardinal. But he got up to sing, and then he was so shy. I guess he had never tried to sing in public before, that he just froze. Like he just stood there, like frozen. And I found myself thinking, like, the kids could have started laughing at him and mocking him, but instead they just started going, "You can do it, you can do it, you can do it." And the guy that was the MC of the thing, Rashawn, he could be shady, but Rashawn was like so sweet. He went up and he hugged the kid, and he was like, "You can do it." And then like all of the other kids started singing along to give the kid the courage to do this. And then he sang his song, and then at the end, like they were all hugging him. Everybody ran up on stage to hug him, and I saw it sort of as a symbol of like kind of what the Ali Forney Center is all about, like standing together with one another in our weakness and our fear and our brokenness, and giving one another the strength to keep going on and to survive. Yeah, it was a beautiful sight. Like it's the sort of thing that I'll be thinking about till I die, just seeing these young people be so sweet to each other and support one another like that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful moment in the book. There's another line that recurs a lot. They are our children. And it's something that you heard that you sort of took to heart. Can you talk about the person that said it and why it came to mean so much to you?
Yeah. So Safe Space had been in the mission house of St. Mary the Virgin Church. It was this Episcopal church right off of Times Square. And they had been so kind and generous to us, and the rector of the church that had invited us in was a man named Father Edgar Wells. And he had this real strong sense of social justice and of wanting to use the church's properties to do good work for the poor of the community. And certainly, like homeless kids were the poor of Times Square. It was sort of like their living room at that time. Then he retired, stepped down as the rector, and a new man came who had no interest in us whatsoever. And we had just invested several $100,000 into the building to upgrade it because I was expanding the program, getting it going 24 hours a day, so young people would have a place to sleep there at night. This was like, in the aftermath of Ali's death when I started really fighting hard. And that was one of the outcomes. We got funding to keep the program open. So we'd invested, several $100,000 upgrading the building with the board of trustees of the church's blessing, saying that they were committed to having us there well into the next millennium. Then this new rector came and, he said, "Oh, your lease is ending in 6 months and you got to go."
Pulled the rug out from under you.
Yeah. And, at that point, we were a large program. We had a medical clinic, a mental health clinic, big meal program, food, showers. Like the licensing issues that it takes to relocate, you got to go to a new site. You got to find the site. You got to raise the money for the site. You've got to get the site licensed to offer those services. I mean, it takes years to do all of that. You can't do it in 6 months.
You were screwed.
So I was, saying, can we buy the building? Can we pay more rent to you? Can you give us an extension so that, the kids don't end up in the streets? And, it was like, no. So they wouldn't give us the time of day. So we had a rally in Times Square to protest this cruelty and this recklessness.
Right.
And at one point, I looked, hundreds of people showed up. I was very gratified by that. And at one point, I was looking across the crowd, and I saw a star, STAR, a little banner. I knew that was an organization that Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson had started in the years after Stonewall. I think it was like Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries was what it stood for initially. And so I went running through the crowd, and there was Sylvia Rivera.
Right.
And Sylvia, of course, had been one of the... Sylvia and Marsha were the first people in New York who ever housed homeless queer youth in an organized way. They had something called Star House, like on 2nd Street and Avenue C, back in the early 70s. And for about a year, they were housing homeless street kids and paying for it with like funds from sex work. Right. But it hadn't been sustainable. But, I knew that Sylvia was both, this kind of pivotal person in the early years of queer liberation, had been very important in the time of the Stonewall riots, and had been this pioneer of saying that our community should care for homeless queer kids. So I was so honored that she was there, and I ran up to her and I hugged her, and it was the last year of her life. I mean, she died less than a year after that, and you could tell she was sick. I mean, right. you could tell she was not well. She looked like somebody. She was probably in her early 50s, and she looked like she was like pushing 80. She looked frail and kind of feeble, and but she I thanked her for being with us, and she kind of was like, "What is wrong with this priest? How can he do this?" And then she looks at me and she goes, "Doesn't he realize they're our children? These are our children, and we have to protect them." And that was something that I always wanted our community to understand.
Right. They weren't really connecting the dots between this is us. We're all one.
Yeah, something that would kill me about seeing these kids in the streets with nowhere to sleep was the sense that the contempt and the hatred that put them there was a contempt against all of us as queer people. That like we as queer people are not worthy of being loved. We as queer people are not worthy of being in a home. We as queer people are not worthy of a kind of fundamental respect. And I felt like it was put on the kids in the harshest way, and that they were bearing this.
They were carrying the whole weight.
That was aimed at all of us.
Right.
They were the most helpless. They were the least able to defend themselves against it and protect themselves against it. And, when Sylvia said they are our children, I was like, that is exactly what I've got to awaken a consciousness of in our broader community.
Right.
That they belong to us, that they're ours. There was always this kind of bargain between the LGBTQ rights movement and individuals, which is like, we're going to tell you to come out. We're going to ask you to come out. We're going to encourage you to come out. And then we're going to fight to protect you so that you're safe when you come out. But, like queer liberation was sort of dependent on people finding the courage to come out.
Right.
Right. So especially in the early decades of the movement, it was very much like, come out, come out, come out. These kids came out and there was nobody protecting them.
Right.
Like they were like left out of the bargain.
They came out when they had the most to lose, when they were the most vulnerable, and they still wanted to have that integrity of self, which is inspiring.
So it was just really important to me to foster a sense of belonging and ownership in a relationship between the broader community and these young people. And I felt that Sylvia saying to me, they are our children, crystallized like what I saw needed to happen. Yeah. So, for years I would, at rallies and stuff and in essays I would write and op-eds, I would always repeat that.
Yeah. It's so simple and yet so profound. You're a very striking figurehead. You're at rallies, and I think you're handsome, you're fit, and I think that you write honestly about how sometimes you would end up in situations where that was kind of like part of the situation, and you write honestly about it, which I appreciate across the board in the book, is a sort of honesty about a lot of different situations. But there were times when you would find yourself with donors where you realized something was on the table that you didn't think was on the table. There was a story of one man, and we don't have to go into detail, but he was proposing something, I don't want to kink shame, but a little out there, and you found yourself in this situation. And then you realized, oh, this is what might be expected of me. But what I liked about the way you wrote it is you were able to show grace to people maybe of a generation that was even more restricted, who had to find workarounds in order to express as part of themselves. I'm not sure what my question is, but I appreciated reading it, and I appreciated you including it and also writing about having compassion for a situation where you were not treated right, basically.
All right. So,
that was a big word salad.
Thank you for your kind words. I'm 59 now, so, I feel like my glory days may be a little bit behind me. I don't think I quite look like what I used to. But
there was not like, oh, what, me? Like, a lot of people act like it's not a thing, and of course it's a thing. We all have eyes. Anyway, and I appreciated the way you were sort of honest about that in the book.
I was 36 when I started the Ali Forney Center, and a lot of people found me very attractive. It's just, that's what it is. Right. I used to be a monk in a monastery, and when I left the monastery, the other monks cried.
That's such a good story. They cried.
Yeah. I guess I was their eye candy. I don't know. I kept my vows. I never did anything untoward in the monastery, but yeah, no, that was a thing. I mean, it was definitely a thing that like in the early years of the Ali Forney Center, like pretty much all the press we got, we would always say, "Oh, Carl's a stud. Carl's hot. Carl's a cutie." You know, my staff would get so annoyed because they thought that I was getting a big. They was like, he's stuck up enough to begin with, and we don't need all these articles.
But you write honestly about that, and that's something I appreciated.
Yeah, and I would often in our early years get up and give speeches at benefits that were like, in bars and clubs, and invariably people would start shouting, "Take it off, take it off, take it off." So that was part of the early years of doing this. I look back and I'm a little embarrassed by it, but
it worked.
It got, look, I needed to get attention for this.
Right. And there's nothing that gets more attention. I know a lot of artists and creative people who are putting out really interesting work on social media. Nothing gets the likes like a shirtless pic. Nothing. They're like, "Oh, fuck, I got another shirtless pic." It's human nature. We get it.
Joe, my God, Joe Jervis, he started letting me, he put a picture of me up getting an award, and he's able to like look at how many clicks people would enlarge in the picture, and he's able to he was able to look at how many. I had the second most enlarged picture in the first 10 years of Joe, my God, and
who was number one? Luganis?
Eric Levin, and I was like, damn, why can't I be number one?
Wait, who was it? Eric Levin?
Do you know who Eric Levin is?
No, but the second we finish this, I'm Googling his ass.
Yeah. Some guy named Eric Levin was number one in the first 10 years of Joe, my God, and I was number two. And but Joe started asking me to do an appeal to his readers every Thanksgiving. So every Thanksgiving, I would write up an appeal about what the Ali Forney Center was going through. I'd tell the stories of some of our young people, and I always felt like I should be giving him pictures of the young people, and he was like, "No, give us a wolfish picture of you, because that's what my readers will really respond to." So I'm like,
but we have this wonderful shot of the kids painting, then they did this art. Nope, give us,
Yeah, no.
Tank top? You got a tank top?
Like, let me look like the big bear muscle man. And
right.
So it was there was something totally absurd about it. But Joe was like, you know what? You always your posts get way more clicks if there's a sexy picture.
The clicks don't lie.
So, that is what it is. But yeah, you asking your question, you got to something that was very much like something that I found myself reflecting on in those early years when this stuff would happen. It was pretty much guys in their 70s and 80s that would kind of wave money in front of me and then expect that I should allow myself to be groped or put into sexually bizarre situations.
Right.
Which I was never willing to do any of that stuff. I mean, my attitude was always like, people can look, but they can't touch. And, and I was never going to be taking my clothes off or any of that stuff. I mean, one person, under pretext of joining our board, persuaded me to sit in a hot tub with him. So I guess there I was somewhat disrobed.
The dreaded hot tub situation. But then you...
But when I would think about these guys, I was like, okay, they grew up, they were 40 when Stonewall happened. Their whole adult personalities were shaped in a time when being queer and your sexuality was sort of like being an outlaw.
Yeah.
And where you had to keep it compartmentalized and hidden from the rest of your life. And I just found myself thinking that's not a healthy way to grow into your sexuality. And I could see why when you put a lot of money and that kind of formative experience together, it can become like a recipe for abusiveness.
Yeah. But I love that you dig deep and try to have some compassion for how things ended up where they were, or what their generation was, where they had come from, and in terms of the movement. And I appreciated that. You write very deeply about things in your book, not just what happened, but what did it mean? What did it mean in the bigger context of things? And I really appreciated about the book. There's something you write on page 94, if you don't mind reading. It starts with, "Through all of this." Do you mind?
Do you want me to just read that paragraph?
Yeah. There's something I think you say that I think is really meaningful. It struck me.
Okay. So in this chapter, the chapter is called Whitewashed Graves, and it's about the gentrification of Times Square and some real brutality that happened to homeless queer kids when all of that aggressive policing was happening.
Right.
The kids were getting arrested. Kids were being driven out to other neighborhoods where they were getting murdered. Kids were actually dying in the police sweeps. They were just, it was brutal. It was like they were being treated like, everybody was talking about how Times Square was being cleaned up. And, what I realized was that in that equation, our kids were the dirt.
Right.
They were not treated as human beings. They were not treated like they were desperate children who needed help. They were just treated as like street trash, vermin. And so I'm talking about that, about like the depths.
Right.
And I wrote it. Through all of this, it felt as though the world's moral compass had been swept away. In the news, in speeches made by city leadership, the overwhelming public narrative was that something wonderful was being done in Times Square. We Americans are expert at crafting stories to justify our cruelty and greed. We laud subjugation as transformation, savagery as safety. I wonder if we tell ourselves this mess of lies so loudly and insistently because we need to cover up the sound of blood crying out from the ground beneath us.
Wow, that struck me a lot. Like, I love that you're wrestling with, you're not saying, I think this is true. You're like, I wonder if. Like, I just like that you wrestle with a lot of these big themes in the book. And when I read that, I thought of something James Baldwin said. I did a deep dive into him a few years ago for a project I was writing, and I'm going to paraphrase. I might mangle it, but he said, I wouldn't want to be white for all the tea in China and all the oil in Texas because I wouldn't want to live with all those lies. Like the things we tell ourselves in order to make Times Square nice, and maybe there's a way to make Times Square nice without brutalizing people, but it feels like maybe there wasn't that much effort put into that part of it, that was not the priority.
Yeah. I think, I would never dare compare myself to James Baldwin, but I think that in profound ways, the United States has been built on lies, or denial,
right? Or just like we're not going to think about
to justify some really brutal stuff. Like a nation that was willing to enslave people to create its wealth. A nation that was willing to commit genocide against the indigenous people in order to grab its territory and still feel good about itself. You have to tell
the greatest country in the world and all of that sort of exceptionalism stuff.
There's this whole thing that America's never been able to get beyond, this kind of gee whiz, we're the good guys.
Yeah.
It's like white folks can't cope if they don't think they're the good guys. And, if we are in situations where it becomes clear that we're not the good guys, we tend to lose our shit. And oh God, you just, that whole gentrification, all of this Giuliani, Disney, bulldozing the kids away so that it could be like this gleaming corporate tourist destination was brutal. It was brutal. And you saw the mything and the lying and the denying so strongly because all you kept hearing was, this is great. This is civic transformation. This is cleaning up the city. And my kids were ending up in their graves.
Oh, wow. brutal. There's another chapter that I thought was really interesting and that was really deep. You talk about a scene with J and T, two of the people that came to the center, and how something that they experienced unlocked something within you. And I'm somebody that I didn't have a lot of trauma growing up, but there were pieces of my past that I put together in the last few years, in my 50s, that have been like really powerful. I was like, oh my gosh, that has been playing on a loop in my head my whole life, and I didn't know it. Can you talk a bit about J and T and that part of the book?
Yeah. So, J and T were AGs, like aggressives, like, it was very big at that time, like sort of like aggressive, young, black, lesbian women. They called themselves AGs. And that summer, like a whole lot had come to the Ali Forney Center. And, we were having a discussion group about family rejection.
Right.
And, I was struck to begin with that kind of one of the toughest of the AGs had even come into the group. She was a nice person, but she just had this real kind of energy of like, don't fuck with me.
Right. Yeah. She didn't seem like, let's talk about our feelings kind of person.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was surprised that she came into the discussion group. And then, she was the first person who shared. I was surprised. And she started telling the story about how her family had put her in a car and said they were going out into the country for a picnic. Like they drove out somewhere into like rural Pennsylvania from Philadelphia maybe. And they got out, like they were having this picnic, and then she went to, I don't know, look at a stream or something. And they all ran back in the car and drove off. Like, they were just abandoning her in the forest. And that was their way of dealing with the fact that they didn't want to have a lesbian in the family.
The specificity of that, like the car and the forest and and then they're gone. They're literally gone.
Yeah. And she just started saying, what the fuck was I supposed to do? I'm in this forest. I didn't know what to do. And she just started crying. And then another young woman, T, started telling this story about how, once her family, found out that she was a lesbian, like nobody would have anything to do with her and they put her out. And then she heard that her grandmother was dying. So she went to the hospital where her grandmother was dying. And when she walked in the room, the grandmother just turned her head away. Like she wouldn't even look at her granddaughter. And then she just started crying and saying, like, why won't they love me? Why won't they love me? And then both of them just got really hysterical and started, like, they started shaking. They fell onto the floor. They were, like, kind of screaming, crying.
Like the floodgates had opened. Like something had become
I got really
enforced.
Scared. Like I felt terrible. Like I hadn't wanted to open up such wounds.
Right.
And, luckily there were two therapists on site, and I ran out and grabbed the therapists, and I was like, you got to help these women because I don't know what to do right now. And I was so upset that I kind of ran out of the drop-in center and spent like the next hour or so just walking up and down 10th Avenue. And, I was like, I mean, obviously the stories that they told were horrible, but it also triggered something in me, and I was like trying to understand what was being triggered in me. And then, I just thought about the reality that when I was a little boy, my mother left us, me and my brother, when I was 4, and when my little brother was 2, my mother and my father divorced, and she was gone. And for the next couple of years, I barely saw her. And, I think that part of the reason that these young people's rejection and abandonment hits me so deep is because of the wounds that I carry from being, like you're a little kid. You can't understand why your mother is not with you.
Right.
Like
why can't they love us?
Is there something wrong with me? Am I unlovable?
Yeah.
Am I, later, when I was an adult, I came out to my father, and he never spoke to me again after that.
That was it.
Yeah. When I was 22, I came out to him, and he never spoke to me again. But that didn't hit me as hard as my mother's. Like when you're a little child, you need your mother. So yeah, like just. I didn't want to write the book as like an outsider looking in on these young people. Like, oh, look at their trauma. Oh, look at their suffering. Like, like it's some kind of entertainment or zoo animal. I wanted to write it from a place where I was writing from within as much as I possibly. I mean, look, I'm a white person, and I've never been homeless. So there are areas where I have to be outside of it. But I think that the profound experience of having been rejected as a child is something that brings me into it.
For sure.
And I tried to write from that reality, and I tried to weave together my own experiences with what the young people experience.
Right. And it sort of hit you in this moment after this experience. And the way you write about it is very vivid and compelling. I was reading the book in a park, and there was a moment, I was moved throughout at different parts. Also amused. There's just all the emotions. I burst into tears at one point. Shit, now I'm crying. It was the moment you met Kate, and she talked to you about Ali after Ali had been murdered, and you learned something about Ali that you didn't know before.
Yeah. So, Ali and I were close, and I think that Ali could tell that I really respected him and looked up to him in a way, and delighted in him.
You saw him the way he wanted to be seen. You saw the special parts.
I guess. And Ali, I could tell, loved me too. Like, I always could feel Ali's eyes on me. And it wasn't like Ali was looking at me like he wanted him to be my boyfriend or something. Ali just was looking at me like he cared about me. Like that was always the feeling that I had, that Ali just really cared about me and cared for me. But because of what I told you about my mother, I'm really good at questioning whether people can really love me.
Yeah.
There's always this doubt in my mind. I always think I'm unlovable.
Like there's an asterisk. There's a but.
Yeah. And so I can always question the reality. Like when somebody shows me that they love me, I can always question it. And wonder if it's a figment of my imagination or something. Or if the shoe is going to drop. So Ali had actually done this really beautiful thing right before the talent show with Tyra Banks, where Ali had come into my office and said that they wanted to have a performance in the show. They knew that I loved Al Green. I had an Al Green poster on my wall in my office. And they said they wanted to sing For the Good Times. And they wanted me to come out, and Ali would be sitting in a chair, and they wanted me to put my head in Ali's lap, and Ali would drop roses on me like Al Green does in concerts.
Yeah, he thought it all through. He had the whole thing. Yeah.
And I was like, Ali, I'm very honored that you'd want to do something like that, but you would totally make people think I'm here looking for sex with kids or something, and I can't do something like that. So I'm not going to be putting my heads in anybody's laps. But, Ali never said what she meant by that, what their real intention was. And I always kind of wondered about that. But like I say, I'm good at questioning, doubting some feelings towards me. So about 3 months after Ali died, I had to call this social worker named Kate Muldowney, who was working at Montefiore's AIDS adolescent clinic. I think I needed a linkage for some contract we were applying for or something like that. And, Kate and I hadn't spoken for a couple months. So she was saying, how have you been doing, Carl? And I said, it's actually been a really hard time. Somebody got killed that I really cared about. And I've just really been struggling with it. And she said, who was it? And I said, I don't think you would know them because they weren't HIV positive. Like, in my mind, Kate would only know the HIV positive kids.
Right.
Working in a clinic for HIV positive teenagers. And she was like, oh, Carl, you don't realize before I started working here at the clinic, I was working for another organization where I would do therapy out on the streets. Like I was in a van and we would go out onto the streets and do therapy with homeless people. And so I know an awful lot of the street kids from that. So I said, Ali Forney. And Kate started to cry. And then she said, oh, my God, Ali would come to me for therapy every Thursday night. And, I loved him. And then she said, Carl, every time I saw Ali, he would always talk about you. And I didn't even know how to take that in. So I was like, oh, you mean he would talk about Safe Space? And she was like, no, he would talk about you. And I was like, okay, you mean he was talking about his favorite staff at Safe Space, Patrick and Yola and George and Tisha and me. And she was like, no, Carl, you were the only one he would talk about. I would try to get him to talk about his family, about growing up, about all of his stuff. And all he wanted to talk about was you. And I was like, me? What would Ali say about me? And she said, Ali would talk about how much he cared for you and that he loved you. And, that sort of put the question to rest that, that Ali loved me. And that moment ended up being very pivotal for me because about 2 or 3 years later, the organization that I was working for was falling apart. They had basically stolen millions of dollars that I'd raised for homeless kids, and I don't know what they did with it. I know that the executive director lived in a very lavish apartment and had a second home with swimming pool and tennis courts and acreage and the
facelift. Yeah, you write about that whole episode in a really interesting chapter. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have proof of where the money went, but all I know is they took $2 million that I'd raised to house these kids and it was gone. And I had whistled, they wanted me to go along with this and put the kids out in the street and shut down the programs I'd opened up. And I wasn't willing to do that. So I ended up whistleblowing against them and got fired. And, but I still thought that the programs I'd opened up would survive. I didn't initially realize how much money had been stolen. Right. I thought it was maybe about $500,000 initially, but over time it turned out that it was closer to $2 million. So when I realized that the programs were going to close, they actually announced that the drop-in center was going to shut down overnight. And one of the young women, a young queer woman that was living there, went to the 59th Street Bridge and threw herself off, trying to kill herself.
Oof.
And thank God she survived. Police saw her and she was wearing this big puffy coat, and I think it cushioned her from the blow. But I started, my conscience started saying, you have to start a new program. The queer kids, the transgender kids especially, are going to start getting killed again.
After the thing closed, and you whistle blew and you were fired, you were like, okay, what now? And you didn't quite know what you were going to do.
Yeah, I felt so burnt out and demoralized and shocked that the money that I'd raised to protect these kids had been taken away. I just felt like I was done with nonprofit life.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what I was. My grandmother had died and had left me some money, so I was like, let me just take some months to think about what to do next.
What next?
Try to heal myself from this. I kind of felt like I'd been raped. I had poured my whole heart into creating safety for these young people after Ali died, and then they stole the money. And it was
right. And it was the people you're working with. It wasn't some outside force. That whole chapter plays kind of like a conspiracy theory. Like suddenly we're in All the President's Men or something. Like it had a suspense to it and a like, oh my gosh, going on. And then you end up being a whistleblower.
Yeah, well, I was just like, I couldn't believe this was all happening. And it was just, but anyway, I did not remotely feel able to start a new nonprofit organization. I didn't even want to, but after the girl jumped off the 59th Street Bridge, I found myself thinking, like, once again, the queer kids are going to have nowhere safe to go, and they're going to start dying in the streets again.
And they are our children.
And I had this picture of Ali, like in a frame on my desk in my apartment. And, like, it was like whatever I needed to do was somehow like bound up in that picture. Like I couldn't look at Ali without my conscience saying, you have to start something to protect these kids.
Right.
And, every time I looked at the picture, I would hear Kate's voice going, Ali loved you, Ali loved you, Ali loved you, Ali loved you. And it's like, what do we owe the people that love us? Like something that I really struggle with and will always struggle with is that I didn't, whatever strength I found to protect these kids and change things, I didn't find it until after Ali died. I wish I could have protected Ali. I will always feel like I didn't do good enough to protect Ali. But then like I found myself thinking, okay, I can't protect Ali, but I can protect the kids that Ali loved.
Right. And the next Ali.
Yeah. And I can prevent hopefully other kids from ending up in the same situation. So, but yeah, it was very much rooted in that conversation with Kate where she just said, Ali loved you, like that was the anchor, like just the consciousness of Ali's love was the anchor that made me do what I had to do. Which is
start the Ali Forney Center, which started very modestly and then has grown and grown. Can you talk about the decision to step down in a few years ago and how did you know it was the right time?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I decided to start the Ali Forney Center, I was very reluctant about it. It wasn't like it was what I was planning to do. I felt like I had to do it. And I told myself, okay, give it 5 years. So I said I would do it for 5 years. But then once I started doing it, I just got so caught up in how bad things were for the kids on the streets and wanting to build an organization that was strong enough and comprehensive enough to give them the care and the nurturing and the support they needed. I also really wanted to change New York City so that it would no longer be acceptable for hundreds and hundreds of kids every night to be out on the streets. Like I wanted to change the political culture. So, I ended up putting 18 years into it where I was the leader of the organization. And it's kind of weird. Like I always felt like there were certain milestones that I needed to achieve where I kind of thought maybe I would have some degree of inner peace or something. I felt like there needed to be enough beds that the young people weren't out on the streets waiting for months to get into the beds. I also wanted to raise the age of the youth shelters so that young people wouldn't age out on their 21st birthday.
Right.
Like a lot of the queer kids, have just had such trauma in their teenage years, had such disruptions in their schooling, had such disruptions in, being able to be loved and nurtured by their families that they were behind the curve. And the day they turned 21, they weren't ready to be on their own. So we'd have this experience where kids would be with us. Then their 21st birthday would come and they'd be like out on the streets again or sleeping in the subways.
You write a number of those scenes. You write a number of those scenes where somebody literally ends up going and standing across the street and looking longingly and you're not able to take them in.
Yeah. So that was something that I was able to get more beds added easier than I was able to get the city and the state to change their laws so that young people could be sheltered for longer periods of time. But by 2018, we got that. we changed we got the state to amend the laws. We got the city to fund some new beds. And I felt like I should have been really happy. Like, we made it,
Yes.
we climbed the mountaintop. And instead I got really depressed. And, I think the way I describe it in the book is like fighting to change the conditions that doomed Ali had sort of built a scaffolding around my heartbreak, harnessing it for power to change things. After I changed things, all that was left was the heartbreak. Like Ali was still dead. Like I built all this great stuff and Ali was still dead. So, I had to wrestle with that. Like, I think that for years I would experience these tragedies, kids dying and seeing their suffering and I would just push through it, like I would just be like, okay, I'm strong. I can deal with this. I'm going to push through and keep going. Once I'd kind of accomplished the stuff that I felt I needed to accomplish, there was nowhere to push anymore.
But the pain was still there.
Yeah. So I think I realized I had to deal with that. I had to grapple with it and trying to run some huge organization because, by the time I stepped down, we were housing, like 150 young people, had like 15 different housing sites, this huge drop-in program, 200 plus staff, like, running this all was a lot of work and took a lot of, energy and attention. And I realized that I didn't have the energy to process what I needed to process and do all of that. That was one dimension of it. There were other dimensions. Most of the young people that we serve are Black and brown. And, I always felt like it would be better for them if it wasn't a white person in charge. Like, I felt like that reinforced certain kind of fundamental experiences people have of like, white people running things and dominating Black and brown people. So, I was really trying to recruit people into leadership positions so that, a person of color could ideally take over the organization, which was what happened. And then it's interesting. When I was young, I was part of something called the Catholic Worker Movement.
Right.
And the Catholic Worker was founded by this woman named Dorothy Day, who, started it in the 1930s. And it was like these radical Catholics who would sell everything they have, live in community with homeless people, try to live out like the teachings of the Gospels about, serving the poor very intensely. And Dorothy was this great leader and this great kind of visionary person. But she really hung on to leadership. Like, she would never really, planned for what would happen when she couldn't do it anymore.
Right. It's like some of our senators now. Like, some of these people that they're in positions of power and they just can't let it go.
Yeah, and I moved into that community, like, a few years after she died, and I really saw that there were dynamics within that community that kind of stemmed from her clinging to power for too long.
Right.
And I didn't want to do that. Like, I didn't want to I started seeing kind of like a generation gap maybe between myself and most of our staff who were like in their 20s.
Right.
They didn't have the experience that I had of like, the desperation of what it was like in the 90s when these kids were dying every couple of months. They hadn't gone through that. And their priorities were just different. And their priorities made sense for their experience.
Right. It's their generation.
They weren't my experience. And I thought, it would be better for somebody who's kind of closer in age and shares more of the same experiences and has more of the same kind of experiential grounding to be running the organization. So there were multiple things. But
right.
And also, my spiritual stuff makes me wary of power.
Interesting.
So I always felt a kind of an ambivalence about being, at the top of a hierarchical structure.
Right. It wasn't your natural thing. Like some people are born for that. It wasn't your natural personality.
No, I mean, I have skills as a leader, like that I can't deny that. But nonetheless, I have ambivalence about power. Yeah.
There's another thing I wonder if you would mind reading is related to this, I think, a little bit about power. It's on page 135. Bottom paragraph, maybe start with, in my decades.
In my decades of serving homeless people, I have observed a demoralizing pattern that kept repeating itself. There is a deformity in human nature. We have the tendency to become so obsessed with wealth and power that we are willing to devalue others, even to categorize them as lesser, to justify our inequalities. If there is such a thing as original sin, I do not see it, as St. Augustine says, as being rooted in sex, but rather in our awful capacity when we have power to exploit or discard the powerless. Love it.
I just think it's just what we were talking about, and I love the way you sum that up. And we see it all over, right? We see it all over in our culture. Just a few more things.
Can I tell you a story that
yes.
It's not in the book, and it's something that happened years before most of the stuff in the book, but that thought kind of crystallized for me. When I was in the Catholic Worker, we were pacifists. Like one of the things that Jesus taught was against, killing people and weapons and militarism. So I was a Catholic Worker in the 80s when Ronald Reagan was really escalating the nuclear arms race. And something that I did several times was like block entrances to nuclear weapons facilities so people couldn't drive in to make the bombs.
Right. And you got arrested, I read.
Yeah. So I remember one time I was arrested when I was 20 years old in Groton, Connecticut, where they have the electric boat facilities. They make like the Trident submarines. They carry the nuclear weapons underground in the ocean. So I had kneel down in the driveway so people couldn't drive in. So anyway, I got sent to jail for like 2 weeks or something like that. And the jail, the cell block that I was in, it was this big, long room with, along two walls, there were like maybe 15 bunk beds on each wall. So maybe like 30 bunk beds. Then at the end of the room was like, one or two sinks and an open toilet, just like a toilet sitting there. Mm. So, when you had to take a shit, you had to like sit there in front of 30 people and take your shit.
Right.
And I just saw that as crystallizing, like, like as a Catholic, I was always like bothered by this notion that like it's somehow sex is like the sin.
Right.
I was like, no, the sin is our need to humiliate people, to treat them like they're nothing, like, and seeing the way they had designed the prison so that these prisoners had to be humiliated like that. It was like this defining kind of moment. And like, I just keep seeing it play out again and again
in different parts of the culture. Like it was designed almost that way for maximum humiliation.
Like we're just willing to treat people like shit. And it's it's not like I'm not that way either. I think it's something in us, it's something in us that we have to like be really cognizant of and look at and try to figure out how to extricate from ourselves. But, when I say this, I'm not saying like other people do this and I'm like some shining saint who figured out the way.
There's a part of human nature. Somehow there's a part of us. Was it hard to write the book? You talked about wanting to sort of process some things after you left. What was it like?
The torturous part of writing the book was writing about Ali's death over and over and over, because I wrote like 7 or 8 drafts of this book. Mm. And like each time I would do like a chapter, I would like, I don't write like it just comes out good. Like I have to work at it and work at it and work at it to get to where like I'm saying what I want to say in a kind of clear, succinct way. And writing about Ali's death over and over and over again. Like I worked on the book for 7 years. So, like the 7 years of writing about Ali's death over and over was really hard. Like I cried a lot.
Yeah.
Writing the book. and telling some of the stories that the young people went through. It's not easy. To write well, you have to put yourself in the situation and you have to feel the feelings, and then you have to be able to describe what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what I find.
Right.
So, like talking about Rashawn dying of a drug overdose, talking about Kiki getting stabbed in the head, talking about, when James Burke aged out and stood across the street, like sucking his thumb and looking up at our window, like, these are hard things.
The images.
Writing about like KJ having their scalp ripped apart and their mother shouting, "You'll be back, the faggots will never take care of you," while they're running down the stairs bleeding from being, assaulted by their mother for being queer. Like, all of it, and there's a lot of stuff that didn't end up in the book, because it gets repetitive. So I can see why my editors like took it out, but I don't want to write a book of trauma porn,
right.
And I wanted to show like the strength and the goodness and the resilience and the joy and all of that and the love. But like, there's no way you could write about this honestly without also going into the traumatic stuff.
Right.
I mean, the fundamental reality of like kids getting thrown out of their homes for being queer is horrible. And the fundamental reality of kids suffering in the streets without having shelter, again, it's horrible.
Right.
And then, the kind of emotional center of the book is Ali getting murdered, and it's horrible.
It's horrible.
So but can I be honest? As hard as it's been, I kind of feel like this is the climax of a process that started when Ali died. Of like wanting to somehow keep Ali's name alive, keep Ali's spirit alive, keep Ali's memory alive. I'm scared for when this is over with.
Well, I just know, having read the book and learned who Ali was, that whenever I see, we're doing a show and it's a benefit for the Ali Forney Center, I will think of him. I won't think of the name. I won't think of a building. I will think of that person. And that's because of what you've created with this book, and also our conversation today and hearing you talk about Ali. What a special person. And that comes through. So if that was part of your mission, I feel like you've really succeeded. But then there's also, okay, then what, right? There's a little bit of what next that you feel now. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I'll be curious to see how the book is received in the world. Yeah, I have to admit, when I wrote it, I was worried that like going so deep into the spiritual aspect of things would be a turnoff for some people.
I think it makes it more rich. I find that I was raised Mormon, but I was never super devout, and then I never officially left the church. But then they tracked me down, and I told them I was gay, and they weren't having it, so I wrote a letter and officially left. But I find the older I get, I find questions of faith more interesting, or I feel a longing for some meaning or something. And I admire people that have it. I drive by churches and I think, oh, that's nice. Like I like that part of the book a lot. And it'll resonate with one of my last thoughts that I'm going to throw at you. But there's one other thing I want to talk about first, actually two. The person that defrauded the organization that was in that chapter, like that awful boss, did they get any comeuppance? Are they behind bars? Did anything happen to them?
So they tried to spin a narrative that I had somehow misspent all of these millions of dollars. And maybe they got their board to buy into that for about 10 minutes. HUD ended up doing an audit that proved that they, couldn't account for $2.2 million that were supposed to have been spent on my program. And I think it's pretty obvious that if I was the one who had done something, I wouldn't have been the one who brought it to the federal government's attention.
Right. Suddenly in the middle of this book, we're in like a thriller. We're in like a conspiracy thriller. And that must have been how your life felt.
So I think she ended up having to step down. I think that they let her step down like she was retiring, but she had no I knew her. She had no desire to retire.
Right.
And she said she was like starting a consulting group for other nonprofits. And I was like, I guess you could teach people how to like steal millions of dollars and not go to jail. I guess that's
actually lesson one. That's the first lesson. It's the master class. Yeah. Oh yeah. What a character.
There were two, I think like the HUD audit was one part of her downfall. And then the other part was, she would discriminate against women who were pregnant. She would fire anybody that got pregnant. And, there were so many like lawsuits as a consequence that the insurance companies were like not wanting to insure the organization anymore as long as she stayed in charge. So, I think like the two of those things.
Yeah. Strike one and strike two.
More than any leader could probably survive.
And the other thing I love about it is Raymond saw right through her bullshit from the beginning, your husband. Yeah, that's how the chapter starts, and I was like, this is like a movie.
Yeah, Raymond has this kind of psychic thing. He can feel a person's energy.
He was like, "You're in danger, girl." Like it was like that kind of thing. Like it was like a feeling he had that was like, "This is bad news. This person's bad
Safe
news."
Space was the beneficiary of the Night of 1,000 Gowns in New York City.
Oh yeah.
And so like in 2001 in April, we were like in a Night of 1,000 Gowns, and we were at a table, like, they gave us a table where some of the Safe Space staff and me and Raymond and my boss were all sitting at this table. And Raymond was sitting next to my boss, and he actually like begged one of my coworkers to switch seats with him because he couldn't stand sitting next to her. So, I was like, well, what's that about? And he's like, oh, I hate the way she makes me feel. And I was like, well, how does she make you feel? And he said, she doesn't care anything about your kids. All she wants is money. And when she looks at you, all she sees are dollar signs, because you're raising all this money. And, he was right.
Bad juju.
Yeah.
After Trump was elected, Thanksgiving, you have two visitors to the Ali Forney Center, two gay divas back to back. And it's, if I was you getting these phone calls that Madonna wanted to come and Lady Gaga and you're trying to juggle them, I'll let the readers sort of devour that chapter because it's remarkable. But wasn't it surreal? You're like, what is happening? Because they were right at the same time.
It was crazy. I mean, my successor is a man named Alex Roque, but at the time he was, so now Alex is running the Ali Forney Center, but at the time he was our development director. And it was the end of the day. It was a few days after election, like maybe 2 weeks after the election, after Trump was elected, we were all demoralized. And he comes into my office. It's maybe like 7:30, 8 at night. And he's like, Carl, there is like somebody saying that they're the representative of a major A-list celebrity, like asking questions about coming to our site for Thanksgiving. But they won't tell me who they are yet. They want me to send pictures of the site, and they want to, And then while we're talking about that, another phone call comes on, and he's like, oh my God, it's another A-list gay celebrity wanting to come the day after Thanksgiving and give presents at our drop-in center. And, so we're sitting there like, who could they be? And then this flurry of calls comes in, and the first one is Madonna. The second one is Lady Gaga. And we're like, how could this be a coincidence that they're both on our phones? And Alex was literally like putting Madonna's representative on hold so they could talk to Gaga's representative, then putting them on hold so they could talk to Madonna's representative. So I was like, this must be some kind of Trump thing. Like maybe they want to show that even warring divas need to put their beefs aside to stand with the people that are being persecuted by Trump and his followers, because they were in the middle of a feud, so I just didn't see how it could possibly be a coincidence. But both of them made us swear that we wouldn't tell anybody. They were like, if you tell anybody, even your coworkers, even your board, that Madonna's coming or that Gaga's coming, the visit's off.
Right.
like Alex and I were the only ones that were allowed to know. And
you weren't able to tell them, well, Gaga's called too. Like you weren't, they made it clear that like if we told anybody, the visit was off. So there was no way of knowing from your end if they were in cahoots or if this was just a random coincidence.
Yeah, and partly I was wondering if like they were doing that in part to see if we could be trusted.
Right. Let's test
like
these
because if the one found out that we told the other, then they would know that like we couldn't keep our mouths shut.
Yeah.
So that's what I was wondering. So yeah, like Madonna came and had Thanksgiving dinner with our kids. She brought like several of her adopted children. She brought her boyfriend. She brought her bodyguard. She brought her chef.
So her chef made the food for everybody.
Yeah.
I bet it was good.
The next day, Gaga and her mother came with like some people from the Born This Way Foundation and a film crew from the Today Show, but it was insane. Like the kids were beside themselves.
Yeah.
It was like
Yeah.
Judy Garland had descended from the golden orb of Oz or something onto the Ali Forney Center. And then, after like Gaga's visit was over, like Madonna and Gaga each put stuff on social media within like an hour of each other saying that they had done this. And that's when they each found out. So yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it's from a certain perspective, it's like the gayest thing that could ever happen.
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah,
it was insane. I mean, but other than like, okay, I at the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, I got to give a speech at the Barclays Center when they, inaugurated World Pride, and I went on after Shaka Khan sang "I'm Every Woman."
Right on.
So I figure like between that and my holiday of Madonna and Gaga, like I've definitely had some queer diva experiences in my life.
Well, as a fan, it was fascinating.
B. Arthur saved me from heaven. So
yes, B. Arthur. Well, it's fascinating to read because they came about it in different ways. They both had different protocols. Like Gaga sang and she led a meditation. And I'm a bigger Madonna fan. I'm a diehard Madonna fan. But I feel like Gaga brought it. She brought some fun elements. So not that it's a competition. It's not.
Yeah, no, they each did things that I think were really wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, like Madonna made everybody lock up their cell phones. Like I couldn't even have my cell phone. Whereas Gaga like posed. She spent like an hour posing. She let every staff person and every young person take like selfies with her on their cell phones. So
sweet.
Like that was really sweet, and doing the performance and sharing about her having PTSD. That was when she first told the world, like at our drop-in center. But it was also like a film crew, the Today Show, like it was extraordinarily wonderful and amazing. But it was also sort of like a production,
yeah.
And with Madonna, it was chill. It was just like. Madonna and her entourage, like sitting down and having a low-key dinner with our young people. And there was something very natural and humble about it.
Yeah. When she went around and asked everyone to say what they were thankful for, which I thought was beautiful. Did you take part in that? Did you say what you were thankful for?
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was?
To be honest, Dennis, I was so flabbergasted that Madonna was sitting at my table that I don't remember what I said I was thankful for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably that something like that the kids were like with us and had a place to be. Probably that's probably what
something
it was.
Something beautiful, beautiful and sweet.
I don't remember. I was just like, I was such a Madonna fan when I was like in my early 20s. I drove like the year that Erotica came out. I just drove everybody crazy. Like I would just go around going like, once you put your finger to the flame, you'll never be the same. It was just,
that album was sort of ahead of its time sonically. Like it kind of didn't get a great reception because of the sex book brouhaha, but I remember listening to it a few years later going, this is like amazing. And of course I went to the Celebration tour and loved it. So there's that. Tell people how they can find your book.
So my book, as you've said, is Making Room, 3 decades of fighting for beds, belonging, and a safe place for LGBTQ youth. If you just Google Making Room and Carl, the Amazon page will come up, the Penguin Random House page will come up that will link you to everywhere where you can order the book. I'm assuming that by the time this podcast is released, the book will be out.
Yeah.
the book comes out on May 21st. Ask for it in your bookstores, ask for it in your libraries. Please give me like Amazon and Goodreads reviews, because those seem to help drive more people to read the book. Buy it for your friends, help them understand, what homeless queer youth go through and how important it is that we as a community see them as our children.
I love that. Are you doing any events that people can come and see you read?
I have an event with Tommy Dorfman coming up in June.
Fun.
We're planning like a big launch party. I'm reading with some of our corporate partners. I'm doing like a live thing with spirituality and practice.
Love it. Are you coming to LA?
I haven't gotten any invites yet.
All right.
So if you want to like put the word out.
All right. Consider the word putting out. I love it. And are you on Instagram or anything like that? Can people follow the journey of the book?
I'm sort of pathetic when it comes to social media.
Yeah.
I am on Facebook.
Yeah. Right on. All right. I have a final thought and a final kind of question, and it may not land, but I think it might, and we'll see. If not, I have a backup. You write a lot about faith in the book. You write a lot about saints. You have favorite saints. And I think two people come across as a kind of saint in this book, Ali and you, frankly. And I know that probably makes you feel uncomfortable, but, people say, oh, they're the saint of blank or the saint of blank. What would you say you could be the saint of, and what would Ali be the saint of?
I would say that Ali is the saint of recognizing that queer youth are worthy of love.
Beautiful.
My God loves me for who I am. It doesn't matter if I'm a man in a wig and a dress. My God will love me for who I am. I mean, that's, and we live in a society that where, especially the religious forces, like, are not willing to love us for who we are. They want to demonize us. Am I the saint of something?
I think you are. But if you, resilience, I don't know.
Maybe I'm the saint of the brokenhearted who figured out how to do something with it.
I think that's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I think that is a theme that comes across in the book, and I think that's a lovely way to end it. Thank you for this conversation, and your book is beautiful. I was very moved by it. I thought it was beautifully written and interesting, and it had some fun, like, different diversion, a Madonna appearance. That's always nice. So congratulations, and thanks again for this.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to get the word out about my book.
I love it. Thanks again to Carl Siciliano. I loved that conversation. Check out his book, Making Room, 3 Decades of Fighting for Beds, Belonging, and a Safe Place for LGBTQ Youth. All right, so this happened. All right, I feel like I know what my TED Talk would be if I had to give a TED Talk, because I invented this thing that I think is working really well for me. And I will break it down for you, and you could apply it in your own life if you feel like it resonates. I call it Outreach Hour. Okay, so when you're trying to make things happen, maybe you're not quite making enough money, there's just not enough going on, you're in that place, and it's a very familiar place for me. And then there's that thing of like, I should send an email to that person. Or maybe I should reach out again. They hired me that one time, maybe, but you don't want to be a pain. You don't want to seem desperate. It's uncomfortable to write those emails. Or maybe it's somebody you want to ask out, or whatever the thing is. It's that uncomfortable outreach. And there are people that aren't expecting to hear from you. Like, there's not like an email chain that is like eminent. It's like more of that, like, I'm going to try to find a casual, fun way to remind them that I'm still on the planet, in the hopes that they will throw me a fucking bone and I'll be able to pay my fucking bills. Basically, that's the theme of Outreach Hour. I'm going to leave that part out of the TED Talk. But here it is. You keep a list in your head of the Outreach Hour people. Maybe you make a Post-it note and you set a time. Maybe you're doing homework with a friend in a coffee house and it's like, all right, it's Outreach Hour. And you just bang through that outreach. Boom, one after another. Boom, boom, boom. Hey, I remember that time we saw that movie, and remember I thought about that the other day, and I was wondering, I'm back, I could do some freelancing and blah, blah, whatever the shit is that you're trying to say with as much charm as possible while fishing for some kind of fucking gig. then you do it all in an hour and you bang through it. And that way, each one isn't that important. And by the end of outreach hour, maybe you've sent out 7 or 8, 10 things, whatever. If you get 1 or 2 positive messages back, it feels like outreach hour was a triumph. And I've employed this a few times. I do it all at once, and it becomes like a game. So each one isn't loaded down with so much desperation and like, I feel weird, whatever. It's about numbers. It's about, I did 7 things in outreach hour. I kind of crushed it. And it becomes a different exercise. For some reason, it takes the awkwardness out of that outreach thing. And the ones that never get back to you, that you never hear from, I don't even remember what they were. Sometimes I do so many things on outreach hour, I don't even remember what I did. But then I'll get an email, like sometimes it's a couple weeks later. And almost all of the emails have been positive. Some have dangled possibilities, or none of them have landed badly. Some people I don't hear from at all. But outreach hour, man, you do it really fast. It becomes its own reward, and it takes the sting out of the awkwardness of, trying to solicit things and being that guy, that we don't want to be. That's like, oh, yeah. But you do it like a game, and it becomes really fast. I should trademark it. But anyway, I didn't. You're welcome to run with that. And if you're somebody whose life is pretty set and you've got your job set, and maybe you're in love and you have a partner, and maybe you post those pictures. Like 13 years ago today, I walked into the Coffee Clutch on 3rd Street, and there you were. If you're that guy, fuck you. You don't need outreach hour. You don't need it. Use that time to help pets or people that need help. Maybe you could do something like that. All right. That's enough for this week. I showed some colors in that little spiel, I'm sure. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'd like to give a shout out to Oscar Rosario for mixing the episodes. My theme music is by Mark Downs for Placement Music. We'll catch you next time on Dennis Anyone. Bye.